Hello and welcome to episode 4 of the Lost Teams podcast. I am one of your co-hosts, Anthony Cherdelli. With me again today is my other co-host, Andrew Lennox. Andrew, how are you doing?
Doing well. How you doing?
Very good, very good.
And it's nice and sunny out
Yeah,
in
it's
November.
nice and
So
sunny.
can't
Surfed
beat
this
that.
morning. Yeah, good California weather. But today we're going to talk about a couple of baseball teams, huh?
Yes, keeping it all baseball this pod
Yeah, absolutely. Old school baseball too. So
for sure.
I'll start it off. I am talking today about the Baltimore Terrapins. You heard me right. Not the Maryland Terrapins, the college basketball or college sports mascot, but the Baltimore Terrapins, a Major League Baseball team, one of the very few not called the Orioles in Baltimore. And they have a really interesting history. They some of the moves they made and the things they were involved in resonated big time to today's Major League Baseball and other sports as well. So that's going
I
to
have a
be,
question right off the bat, actually.
yeah,
So why? So the Maryland Terrapins, obviously the university. Then is there a connection between them and this franchise?
yes, not
The
a
name
not direct
or
connection, but
Maryland or
the
something?
the terrapin is the Maryland state reptile. I've got
Oh,
it in,
okay.
which is weird to have, but I guess I'm a
Didn't
big
know
reptile
there
fan.
didn't know there were state
Yeah,
reptiles.
they're named after the diamondback terrapin, the state reptile of Maryland, and that's a turtle. For those of you who don't know, terrapin is a turtle. So basically the Terrapins were the first professional baseball team from Maryland not to be named the Orioles. They were in the Federal League. So this is where it starts to get interesting for me. The Federal League was a competitor league started by wealthy businessmen in the mid 1910s, and they wanted to compete, get a chunk out of the Major League Baseball pie, because at that point, that was when baseball was getting huge, really developing into a major business. And the Federal
Sure.
League, they decided, well, we're going to start our own major league league, basically, because the other thing you have to realize back then is that even though there was a governing body of organized professional baseball, there
Yeah.
wasn't one like there is today. There wasn't a commissioner. It was kind of
Right.
a group of people. So back then, the American and National League, even though they had some agreements with each other not to poach each other's players, and by
Uh-huh.
then there was the World Series, but there
It'd
was
be
there.
it'd be interesting. Sorry to interrupt. It'd be
That's okay.
interesting to see how many leagues through the years, or sports, I should say, had leagues named the Federal League.
Yeah,
There's a few
yeah,
in other sports.
yeah, for sure. The hockey, the lower tier professional hockey league comes to
Right.
mind. The Federal League was formed, and like I was saying, back then the American and National Leagues were kind of competitors, though they agreed to not to poach each other's players, and they'd play in the World Series to crown the ultimate champion of professional baseball. But the Federal League didn't honor those rules. Back then there was no free agency, but the Federal League basically told the players they would be able to become free agents. They offered them large contracts. So the Federal League was considered this third major league. And before I continue, I'll tell you about all of my sources because there were a lot.
Oh, okay.
An article from historicbaseball.com, and there was no author there, but it was about the Federal League. Very well done. An
Sure.
article from the Baltimore Sun in 1944 called Red Sox Arrive for Oriole Park Drill. That was by the AP. Sports Encyclopedia by Frank Fleming. You might know Frank Fleming as Frank the Tank if you're a Barstool reader. He had an article on the Baltimore Terrapins. The Maryland Manual online government website had an article about the history of baseball in Maryland. And then a book called Babe, The Legend Comes to Life by Robert Kramer. Another book called The Big Bam, The Life and Times of Babe Ruth by Lee Montville.
So there's a Babe Ruth connection.
Yes, there is.
All right.
A Baltimore Oriole phenomenon, 90 years of history as seen by 3 trainers from the Bleacher Report. And then the third inning of the amazingly well-done Ken Burns baseball documentary, and an article in The Week by Jesse Wright Mendoza. So a lot of sources
Did
here.
your research.
Yeah.
Research.
It was interesting.
Resource.
This is I had a lot of resources. It was an interesting subject. So we'll get back to the leagues. They were competitor leagues. The Federal League basically joined, and it created, really, they were called the Pirate League. Kennesaw Mountain Landis, comes into this later, he was the first commissioner of baseball later on, but he plays a big part in this story. He called them a Pirate League. Basically, the Federal League was like, well, we're professionals now, so deal with it, and we're not going to follow any of your rules. And the American League, which was new back then, and the National League, which is the original, They didn't take so kindly to that.
Did the Federal League have the same rules as the other two leagues?
Yeah, it was same baseball rules in terms of the way the game was played, but
Right.
the business side of things and recruiting players was not. They had no problem poaching big name players off of
Okay.
American and National League teams, which they did successfully to the tune of 81 players over the short time they were around.
It's kind of like the WHA in the 70s poaching NHL players.
Yep. So the Terrapins as a team, so the Federal League only lasted for a couple years, and we'll get a little more into that because the team and the league are pretty closely entwined in terms of their history.
Okay.
They were owned by former Baltimore Orioles manager, and this was one of the many iterations of the Baltimore Orioles. This is the first one back in the 1890s. Ned Hanlon, who had managed another former Major League team called the Orioles to 3 National League pennants. This is, of course, before there was a World Series, so that was the highest
Big
championship
deal. Yeah.
you could win. That Orioles team was contracted by the National League eventually. Then at the end, after Hanlon was done, they had John McGraw, who was a famous old baseball manager. McGraw was upset and went to the American League, which is the newly formed league way back then, and started another Orioles team in the American League. So John McGraw's Baltimore Orioles of the American League were eventually forced to move to New York, and they became the New York Yankees. So
Sure. Oh, wow.
yeah. So then there was a minor league Orioles team that came after that. They were around for a while, but when the Terrapins basically established themselves, they built their park across from that Orioles park, which factors in pretty big later. But Hanlon, the owner of the Terrapins, had owned that minor league Orioles team for a while. I know this is very confusing. And that, like I said, that Orioles team was not the original. They weren't a major league team. They were a minor league team. They weren't part of that original National League franchise or the American League franchise that became the Yankees. So
a lot of these old school franchises have very complicated histories.
yeah, it's just a mess.
Yeah.
So like I said, the Terrapins built their stadium across the street from Orioles Stadium. And Terrapin Stadium, I went back and looked at some pictures, was pretty cool. It looked like a mini Fenway Park. If you've ever seen old pictures of Fenway, really old pictures, the fans are sitting in front of what became the Green Monster. And the Green Monster had all these advertisements on them. So the fans were basically in front of that. And if you hit the ball into them, I think there were certain rules about whether it was a double play or a ground rule double. So
ridiculous, but yeah.
Yeah.
So they sat in front of the fence?
Yeah, so they sat in front of the fence, which is common back then.
Oh.
And then it kind of goes into this deep center field, which looks just like Fenway, and then the bleachers and right. It really looked almost like
I wonder how many people got just pelted by
I'm
fly
sure.
balls.
Well, there weren't cell phones or anything back then, so they were probably paying attention.
They were pretty focused. Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, but it was really like a miniature. I don't know how many people it seated, but it was definitely looked like a miniature Fenway Park, which kind of is another thing we'll hear about at the very end, because there was a reason, I think. So perhaps not surprisingly, after the Terrapins, like I said, disbanded, which we'll get to in a little bit, the Terrapin Park actually hosted the Red Sox on multiple occasions, which I'll talk about at the very, very end. So this is the section from Sports Encyclopedia by Frank Fleming. The Terrapins were managed by Otto Knabe. So that's another awesome name, like Knabe was his last name.
Knabe. Yeah, I've never heard that last name. Not too many people named Otto these days either.
No, I mean, I can't think of any. So the Terrapins won their first game 3-2 over the Buffalo Buffheads. I don't know if it's Buffades or Buffheads, but it's spelled Buffeds. So I don't know if that's like a slang term for people from Buffalo. It's just weird.
Maybe they had to deal with old country buffet or something.
Yeah.
I'm just kidding.
The Terrapins were competitive in their first season. They went 84-70, and they finished 4.5 games behind the Indianapolis Hoosiers. Another ripped right off of actually a basketball movie.
I have a connection in my team. Would you say Indiana Hoosiers or Indianapolis Hoosiers?
Indianapolis Hoosiers.
Okay, I mentioned them in mine as well.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So this is where their first really important impact came in baseball that changed the landscape of professional sports. You remember when I said they built Terrapin Park across from Oriole Park, where the minor league iteration played? So that Oriole team, just a few months before, had signed a young pitcher from St. Mary's Industrial School for Boys by the name of Babe Ruth. He
Oh,
was already lighting it up with the Orioles, and they were one of the best teams in their league. But because the Terrapins were a new team, they were a major league team, no one really paid attention to the Orioles. So
right.
attendance was really bad. The Orioles owner explored a move to another city, but that fell through. So eventually he had to sell basically all his good players off to other teams to kind of make up his investment. So he eventually sold Babe Ruth to the Red Sox. So that's how Babe Ruth started his professional baseball career or Major League Baseball career and became a member of the Boston Red Sox.
Interesting.
There were rumors that the Terrapins had offered Ruth a contract, but the team denied it, apparently, according to the Babe Ruth book, one of the Babe Ruth books that I cited. From there, you know the rest of the story. He played for the Red Sox. He was a really good pitcher and hitter, and the Red Sox won multiple World Series with him and then sold him to the New York Yankees for almost nothing. And that started the curse of the Bambino. So
Sure.
that really began in Baltimore, thanks partially to the Baltimore Terrapins.
Right.
So there's the first significant part of the Terrapins' legacy, basically indirectly influencing a major event in sports, like the Blades did in our first episode, where they indirectly caused or semi-directly caused the building of the Los Angeles Forum, which became a backdrop for the Lakers dynasty. Well, the Terrapins caused Babe Ruth to move to the Red Sox and the Yankees, causing basically dynasties for both those teams at different times.
Yep.
And causing Yankee Stadium to become nicknamed, the first one, the house that Ruth built. So that was their first kind of influence. And even though the Terrapins were taking Orioles fans from the minor league Orioles, it wasn't enough to make them a financial success either.
Oh.
So in their second season, in an attempt to attract more fans, the Terrapins signed Philadelphia Athletic star and future Baseball Hall of Famer Chief Bender.
I've heard that name somewhere.
He's a Minnesota. It's probably a Minnesota connection. So
Okay.
the Athletics had just won the World Series, and like teams still do today, were selling off their stars to get ready for a rebuild. Bender, or Charles Albert Chief was his nickname, Bender, was a Minnesota native and a member of the Ojibwe tribe.
Oh,
So that's might be
very interesting.
Yeah, he had gone 17-3 the year that his last year with the Athletics, the year that they won the World Series again, and had a 2.26 ERA and 7 shutouts. So
That's
pretty good.
cool. Yeah.
But in 1915, he tanked. He compiled a record of 4-16 with a 3.99 ERA, which still not bad. I mean, I would have taken that in my college career if I could have. But that was a long time ago, so we won't talk about that. The Orioles went 43-109, so terrible in their second season, and finished almost 60 games out of first place, so never really competitive.
Mm.
That would be the last season the Terrapins played, but not their last impact on professional sports. And this is going to be, I find it interesting. It's going to get a little more complicated in terms of law stuff, but here it goes. So because the Terrapins were a Federal League team and were able to lure star players away, and other Federal League teams were able to lure star players away from the American League and the National League, those leagues took notice. So between 1914 and 1915, things kind of went downhill between the three leagues, and the Federal League sued the National and American leagues. The judge that was overseeing the case, his name was Kennesaw Mountain Landis, who, if you've seen the baseball documentary or know a little bit about baseball history, he was the first. He became, after this, the first commissioner of Major League Baseball.
Oh, okay.
But at the time, he was a judge, and basically, he clearly was biased. He already loved baseball.
Right.
He kept urging both sides to negotiate instead of making a ruling. And I don't know. I never found out if it was intentional or if it was an accidental effect of it. But it just kept up piling the costs and costing more and more. The Federal League couldn't afford it. It put them in such a big financial hole that the owner of the Federal League and a few other team owners agreed to let the American and National League teams buy them out and buy their players out. So that really put into motion the next thing. So one of the only teams that wasn't offered a buyout from the American National League were the Baltimore Terrapins.
Huh.
They then sued the American League, the National League, and some Federal League members and others, alleging that
So
they broke the Sherman Antitrust Act, which is
everyone's
basically
suing each other. It seems
yeah.
like
So it
wow.
seems like today. So that lawsuit was called Federal League Club Baltimore Terrapins versus the National League,
Oh,
and
suing the whole league.
yeah, and ATOL basically. So all those
Yeah,
different parties. And the Sherman Antitrust Act was basically an act that Congress put into place way back when to keep businesses from kind of coming together, multiple businesses, and dominating a market, setting prices, really influencing and stopping free trade and dominating a market. Anybody who's listening who's knows a lot about the law or about politics, I'm probably butchering this, but I'm going to do as best as I can.
okay,
So basically, they are arguing that the National League and organized baseball was a monopoly.
sure.
So they basically argued that what the leagues were doing were they were controlling the players' salary, the ticket prices, so that the other baseball leagues couldn't be competitive. And that the American and National League conspired with the Federal League officials after they lost that first lawsuit to basically buy them out and force the competition away.
I
Uh,
see. Okay, I mean the monopoly thing makes sense.
Yeah, so the Terrapins won that case, but the appeals court reversed the decision, and that went all the way up to the Supreme Court, where
Jeez, wow.
yeah, so the Supreme, and this is where the influence comes. So the Supreme Court agreed with the American and sided with the American and National League and the people who were being sued, the defendants and the appeals court, basically saying that professional baseball was not interstate commerce. So even though the teams traveled between states to play each other, the act of playing a baseball game could be done in one place, and the moving from state to state was kind of a side thing that wasn't necessary, but they chose to do it.
Right.
So because it
Sounds like
wasn't
a mess.
yeah, so because it wasn't considered interstate commerce, it couldn't fall under federal laws. So like if you're a fan of crime shows or crime podcasts and they talk about someone getting kidnapped and then crossing state lines, and then the FBI comes in because the crossing of state lines makes it a federal jurisdiction.
Oh,
So
yeah.
it's the same with this because
Oh,
baseball
wow.
wasn't part of interstate commerce. The federal laws enacted by Congress didn't apply. So Major League Baseball was exempt from antitrust, the Sherman Antitrust Act. Um, and so I'm basically going to so this quote comes from the from Baseball Reference, I believe.
Okay.
Although the Supreme Court subsequently refused to apply the federal baseball logic to other professional sports leagues, it also refused to overturn the federal baseball ruling. In Toulson versus the New York Yankees, which was in 1952, the court decided to let the existing ruling stand because baseball had built its business under the impression that it was not covered by antitrust law, and suddenly applying it would be unfair. It also argued rather illogically that Congress had not seen fit to apply antitrust law to baseball, even though the original exemption was created by the court rather than Congress. In Flood versus Kuhn, 1972, the court continued to uphold the precedent, though it was described as anomalous, and suggested that Congress should change the laws to apply to baseball. It took another quarter century after the Flood ruling for Congress to remove any part of baseball's special status. The Curt Flood Act of 1998, so this is 80 years later, 84 years later,
Yeah.
applied antitrust law to baseball, but only in labor matters. The Flood Act thus entrenched the remainder of baseball's exemption from the antitrust law. So basically, those two cases, even though the courts overturned parts of that original decision, the fact that baseball is mostly exempt from antitrust law still exists.
That's
And
interesting. Wow.
yeah, and because baseball is so, and other leagues like the NHL, NFL, and NBA aren't exempt in this way from antitrust laws. So that's why before, so that's why there's never been really since the 50s a competition league like there has been in hockey and basketball and football, like the WHA, the ABA, and the USFL. So
The XFL.
in the XFL, yeah. Like I think the last, even though the Federal League was the last competition league to play, I think
Yep.
there was one considered in like the 50s, but they never played a game.
I
Um,
see.
so these other leagues have had to deal in some way with competition, at least for brief periods. They also can decide more unilaterally where teams move or can't move. So, like the only team that's moved in our lifetime and before has been the Expos from Montreal to
Yeah, you're
Washington.
right. You're right on that. Yeah, the teams never move.
Yeah, and I
There are
mean,
plenty of teams that should move.
yeah, it's and versus NHL where there's the Thrashers have moved, and the NFL where what Chargers, Raiders, and Rams have all moved in the last 5 years. It's
Seattle in the NBA. I mean, that's been
yep,
what,
yep,
probably 10 years ago.
yeah. Seattle to Oklahoma, I think was like 05 or 06.
Sure.
Um, and it also, and this is where it really is harmful, I think, it screws over minor league players. They're not classified as full-time employees. I don't really understand the nuts and bolts of this, but because of antitrust laws, partially, I think Major League Baseball doesn't have to pay their minor league players minimum wage. They classify them kind of as interns or like seasonal employees. And so
That's ridiculous.
they really get screwed.
You think that'll, I wonder if at some point, I'm surprised, like minor league baseball hasn't had some type of lawsuit against the MLB.
Well, that's
Has it happened?
Well, no, minor league baseball is the MLB. So the Major League Baseball teams own the minor league teams, and their excuse basically is that, well, these are our employees, and they're cutting costs. They can't afford to play. They claim they can't afford to pay minor league players like more. Right. But if you can Google like minor league not getting fair wages, some of the stories are ridiculous. There are like 7 or 8 players renting like a 2-bedroom apartment. They're like sharing cars. They eat garbage.
So like AAA players don't even make decent money?
Yeah. It's
guys that aren't up and down.
All right, so this came from an article in The Athletic by Levy Weaver. The average salary for a minor league baseball player whose contract is handled by Major League Baseball ranged from around $6,000 in single A to around $9,350 in double A to nearly $15,000 in triple A in 2018. The poverty line in 2019 was $12,490. So everyone except for a full-time well-paid AAA player is who doesn't see a lot of any major league time is making money below the poverty line.
That's terrible.
So
I'm surprised that hasn't been a bigger story.
Yeah, ever. It's flown under the radar, and with the cancellation of minor league baseball season this year, it's been, I think, it got some spotlight, but there's definitely more that needs to be done because of the Baltimore Terrapins lawsuit versus the Federal League and the way it was decided. That's one of the reasons why minor league players are paid so poorly even today. And this is just the last little bit. It's helped Major League Baseball stay wildly profitable in a time when their fans are kind of getting older and the sport is, to be honest, getting less popular because it's so boring and they're so set in their ways that they refuse to change.
Right.
But part of that, the reason they're still making a ton of money is because of this the lawsuit that the Terrapins brought and lost. And I had
no idea about any of this.
Yeah. And last but not least, I mentioned the Red Sox playing at Terrapin Park. So Terrapin Park became Oriole Park 5 or Oriole Park V, not V, in Roman numeral 5, because it was it just got taken over by another professional team that called themselves the Orioles. So,
okay.
And that's where the Red Sox played an exhibition game in 1919 with Babe Ruth. So kind of rubbing the dirt in a little bit into the injury. But that was long after that. So after the Terrapins and lost their lawsuit and the Federal League disbanded, that was 4 years later. So it wasn't like they were still around. And then in 1944, the Red Sox had their spring training at the place formerly known as Terrapin Park due to World War II travel restrictions. So that resemblance to Fenway Park, I think, really might have attracted them to come back there multiple times.
Okay.
And that's the story of the Baltimore Terrapins.
Yeah, I definitely picked up a lot of useless knowledge I can use to impress friends at the bar.
Useless knowledge I can use. I love that.
If we can ever go to the bar again.
Yes, I'm confident that we'll be able to sometime soon. All right, you want to tell us about your team?
Sure. Let me get right into it here. So I actually got all my information from baseball-reference.com, and then also a book that was written by Rex Hammond, the Minneapolis Millers and the St. Paul Saints. We're going to keep this podcast, as I said earlier, on baseball And the team I actually going to focus on is the franchise was named the Minneapolis Millers. They were a minor league baseball franchise that were based in obviously Minneapolis, Minnesota. They began play in 1884 in the Northwestern League.
Oh, so they're old.
Very old. And they were actually around for a very long time too. So I'll get into that later. They actually joined the Western League. They were in this league, the Western League, from 1894 to 1900. The Western League had some unique franchise names that included the Indianapolis Hoosiers, as we talked about earlier, the Milwaukee's. If that's right, that's pretty ridiculous. No originality there. The Cleveland Forest Cities. Don't know if Cleveland's nicknamed the Forest City. I have no idea. The Denver Mountain Lions.
There we go.
The Leadville Blues. And the Leavenworth Soldiers. And those were just a few of the teams in the league. There was probably about 10 or 12 teams in the league. Anyways, I have no idea where Leadville. I think Leavenworth is probably in Kansas.
I think Leadville might be in Colorado. If it's the same city, isn't there a really Leadville like way high up in the mountains where they have that ultra marathon?
There is a Leadville in Colorado, and yes, that's correct. But why would they have a team there? I don't even think many people live there.
Well, it's the 1800s.
True.
There might have been 10 people living there that don't live there now.
May have been a booming metropolis then. Who knows? So yeah, there was some pretty unique names in that league for teams. Despite losing they had an in-state rival, the St. Paul Saints, by a score of 41-8 in 1896. The team won their first Western League pennant in 1896 as well. So they got just absolutely their butts kicked, but were able to regroup after that game.
41-8 sounds like a game where they ran out of pitchers and had to throw like their second baseman on the mound it just never ended. That's like
some drunk in the crowd, maybe. I have no idea. Anyways, so the as I said, they won their first Western League pennant in 1896. Soon after, the Western League actually became the American League in 1900. In that league, the Millers finished dead last that season. The team's top two players during those years was pitcher Bill Hutchinson. They were led offensively by Perry Worden, who actually sounds like he was an excellent player. As I said, the team finished dead last, but Worden led the league in doubles, slugging percentage, and home runs.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he didn't have any support whatsoever from the rest of the team, from what I read. I don't know what happened, but there was, I guess, I don't know if there was a Western League still, but like another Western League, because the Millers moved back into the Western League in 1901. Once again, so in 1902, the Millers joined another league. They keep switching leagues here. Then the league was called the American Association. The league included teams from Kansas City, Milwaukee, Indianapolis, St. Paul, Columbus, Louisville, and Toledo. And they've actually stayed in that league after bouncing around, for a few years. They stayed in that league through 1960.
So I wonder if when they were in the American League, were they technically a major league team, or were they still, was the American League a minor league?
As far as I know, they were always a minor league team.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah. So, getting back into it here. Yeah. So they played in that league for many years until 1960s. And they actually tore up this league, the American Association, winning 9 pennants and never finishing last. And they had a pretty decent following in the Twin Cities. They played in a Nicollet Park, a 4,000 seat stadium, which they eventually added more seats, making it an 8,500 seats ballpark. So they had a decent following. A second team the Minneapolis Broncos, who were a farm team of the Millers, also played there.
Oh, nice.
In 1961, Major League Baseball's Washington Senators actually moved to Minnesota to become, the team we know now, the Minnesota Twins.
Mm-hmm.
So the Millers and the neighboring team, the St. Paul Saints, actually ceased operations with the news of the Twins moving to the Twin Cities. I don't think it would have been possible for the three teams. I mean, the Twin Cities is a decent-sized city, but I don't see three professional baseball teams being able to survive, especially during those times.
Yeah.
So as I said, the Saints and the Millers ceased operations. Actually, both the Saints and the Millers had a huge rivalry, and they had a tradition of playing holiday doubleheaders. One would be at one stadium, and then later in the day they'd go across the river and play at the other team's stadium. So that's pretty cool.
It's like a cool old tradition. You would wonder if they could ever do. I mean, if they could ever do that in New York or something, or like
you could do it in the Bay Area.
Yeah, you could do it in the Bay Area. You could do it. Well, it would be hard. I think New York would probably be the easiest place because they're relatively close. Like here, if the Dodgers and Angels tried to play, it would be like, good luck getting through traffic. You'd have to play at 8 a.m. and like 7 p.m.
They'd have to take choppers there.
Yeah.
Anyways, so back to the Millers. This team, what was special about this franchise is that they had some legends, Major League Baseball legends that actually, played for this franchise at one time. This list includes legends like Ted Williams.
Oh yeah.
Willie Mays, Carl Yastrzemski, and Orlando Cepeda.
Yep.
And knuckleballer Hoyt Wilhelm. And
That's
actually
incredible.
Many others. And some of you might know who Felipe Alou is. He played for the Millers as well. Obviously, was a great manager for the Montreal Expos. They also had a young player named Mo Berg, who actually Anthony knows a ton about, and he's going to give you some information on him. Very interesting and unique individual.
Yeah, well, I just because I've seen the movie and read a little bit. Mo Berg is a very interesting story. So he was a young baseball player. I think he started off as a third baseman and then moved to catcher, but and he had some success. But after his career, he became a spy. During World War II, he was a spy, I think, for the OSS, which was like the precursor to the CIA, basically. And one of his missions was to figure out. He was. I think he graduated from Princeton. He was an Ivy League graduate, very smart guy.
Right.
So one of his assignments was to figure out if the Nazis were close to assembling an atomic bomb. This is during the nuclear arms or the first the race to get a nuke to end World War II.
No kidding.
And so. And a lot of this you can see in the movie. The Catcher Was a Spy. It's a really cool Paul Rudd movie. I like it a lot. I hadn't even heard of it, and then I saw it on like Stars or something like that.
Is it an older movie?
I don't know. Within the last 10 years, it's pretty new, but it tells his story. And the most interesting thing, he was trying to basically find and question Heisenberg, the scientist, the German scientist I almost said physician, the rocket scientist for the German rocket scientist who was responsible for trying to, I think, create an atomic bomb for Germany. And when he was either supposed to assassinate Heisenberg or question him. And he questioned him and figured out basically in that one meeting that Germany was not close to making an atomic bomb, even though they were trying. So he let Heisenberg live, which is like crazy. It's an intense scene in the movie, but it's just also a very interesting part of history.
I'm going to have to watch that. And there you go. More useless knowledge. No, it's very interesting. I had no idea about this guy. So, yeah, I'm going to check out that movie.
Yeah, strongly suggested. But I think
he played for the Millers.
Yeah, he played for the Millers for one season. It sounded like, from what I read on Wikipedia, that he was a little bit of a diva. He didn't want to play minor league baseball. He had already been in the majors or something. He didn't want to play minor league baseball. And then he did for a little bit. And I guess that's when he moved to catcher.
Ivy League grad, I could see him as a little bit of a diva. like I said, as I mentioned a bit earlier, there was obviously a heated rivalry with the St. Paul Saints and the Millers, and that lasted from 1903 to 1955. So many years of having a crosstown rivalry, basically, competing well for fans too.
Yeah, I mean that's a healthy baseball community if you think about it. Like,
right?
Especially in the '60s when baseball was so popular. Like, I mean, I know they were around for a lot longer, but that whole era from like the early 1900s to the '60s, baseball was way more popular than it is now.
Yeah, baseball's pretty popular in Minnesota, despite the weather sometimes. But yeah, there's been a lot of good major leaguers like Dave Winfield, Joe Mauer, Paul Molitor, Jack Morris, that have come out of the Twin Cities.
Joe Mauer was he was homegrown. I never knew that.
Yeah, he's from like St. Paul.
Oh, that's cool.
Yep. Dave Winfield, I mean.
Yeah. Wow, Joe Mauer is 37 years old. That is he retired last two falls ago.
Yeah, he just retired. Yeah.
Wow, that time went fast. I remember when he was when he was a rookie.
Yeah, he was an amazing catcher, but his knees, they had to move him over to first base.
Yeah, what a career.
Yeah, excellent career. Yeah. So as I said, the Millers ceased operations after news that the Minnesota Twins were moving from Washington, D.C. But the history continues actually, but not for a long time after. In 1994, actually, the Millers' name was used by a new professional team that played in the Great Central League, and they only existed 1 year.
That's sad.
Yeah, so it's a pretty cool name too. It's unique. I have no idea why they were called that.
Well, isn't a Miller? It's Miller's like it's like a trade. It's
like a paper mill.
A Miller is. What does a miller do? Let's see. A miller is a person who operates a mill, a machine to grind a grain to make flour. So, perfect. Got it. Well, we'll see if we keep that part in.
Yeah, so the Millers actually were a AAA affiliate on two separate occasions for the Boston Red Sox.
That makes sense. That makes sense for the Williams and Yastrzemski connection.
You're right. And they were also a AAA affiliate for the New York Giants.
Oh, the New York baseball Giants.
Right. So I believe you talked about them in another podcast.
Yeah, when they were talking about how unoriginal the two groups were between baseball and football, where the football teams would just name the same name as the baseball teams.
Right. And then going back to a question you asked earlier, if the Millers were ever considered, I think like a Major League Baseball team. No, they were not. They were a AAA team, a AA team, and a single A team in their existence.
Got it.
I actually have a side note.
Yeah.
It has nothing to do. Well, it does have something to do with the Millers. Their rivalry, the St. Paul Saints, actually exists again. They actually play in a beautiful downtown park in downtown St. Paul. And they get big crowds.
Yeah, absolutely. That is interesting. It's cool, and we've talked about this before. The legacy that old teams leave, even if it's as sometimes they'll have huge impacts on modern professional sports, like we've talked about. But even as little as just like being the first team to be named that name, and then having a team 30 years later come and name themselves after the old team, it happens all the time.
Yeah, it's crazy.
I think that's going to do it for episode 4. Anything you're working on, Andrew, or you want to tell them where they can find you on social media?
Yeah, actually, my Twitter handle is at AWLENN.
Awesome. You can find me at Deli Tweets. That's at DELLITWEETS. And feel free to send us any questions, suggestions that you have, like I said, for teams that you want us to cover on this podcast. And please, 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 if you do like us, rate us 5 stars on your whatever podcast app you listen to, whether it's Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Leave us a review or tell us you hate us. Just tell us to go kick rocks and you never want to listen to us again. That works too.
That works.
All right. Thanks a lot. Talk to you guys later.